Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I have been working as a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park for 11 years. People constantly ask me what the hardest part of the job is, expecting me to say the heat, the tourists, or the long hours. I tell them it's the silence, not the kind of silence you hear during the day when the crowds thin out. I'm talking about the silence you feel when someone is missing, and you're standing on the edge of a mile-deep chasm, knowing there's a person down there still calling for help. That silence sits in your chest like cold water and never goes away. I felt it 5 times in my career. The last time was 3 months ago, and I still hear it when I try to sleep. It was early September when the Caldwell family entered the South Rim Visitor Center. I wasn't on duty that morning, but I saw them in the parking lot on my way to my shift. There were 4 of them. The father was tall, maybe in his mid-40s, wearing one of those expensive hiking jackets they buy at REI before coming here. The mother was younger, probably in her 30s, and she had that stressed look people get when they realize just how big the canyon really is. The 2 children were boys, teenagers, and both were glued to their phones. A normal family. Nothing stood out. 2 days later, their rental car was still in the parking lot, and when the front desk reported it, I thought of them again. We have a lot of cases of people overstaying. People think they'll go for a day hike and camp somewhere without telling anyone. They're usually fine the next morning, sunburned and dehydrated. Protocol is to wait 24 hours unless there's something unusual. What was unusual here was that all their camping gear was still in the car. Sleeping bags, tent, food, water bottles, everything. It was as if they had gone for a hike and were about to return. So we started searching. I did the first search with another ranger named Hayes. Starting from the visitor center, we split up the main trails that families usually use. Bright Angel, South Kaibab, Rim Trail. We took the photos we got from the check-in camera with us and showed them to everyone we met. A few people remembered seeing them on the Rim Trail the first afternoon they arrived. An elderly woman said she had seen the mother sitting on a bench near Mather Point, while the father and children were walking ahead. She remembered the mother looking sad, as if she had been crying. The woman had asked her if she was okay, and the mother had said she was fine, just tired from the trip. This was around 4 in the afternoon on their first day. No one had seen them since. On the second day, dogs and a helicopter were brought in. The dogs picked up a scent heading west along the Rim Trail, but it disappeared near Hopi Point. It just stopped. The dog trainer said that sometimes this happens when people get in a car, but we had already confirmed that their car hadn't moved. We searched every parking spot, every lookout point, every trail within 5 miles. We found nothing. No clothing, no footprints we could verify, no trash, nothing. It was as if they had walked to Hopi Point and vanished into thin air. On the 3rd day, the helicopter spotted something. About half a mile west of Hopi Point, there is a section where the edge becomes unstable. The rock there is Kaibab limestone, like most of the edge, but there is a fracture line running parallel to the edge, and pieces sometimes break off. There had been rock falls there before. The pilot saw what he thought was fabric wedged between rocks about 40 feet below the rim. When we rappelled down, we saw it was a jacket. His father's expensive REI jacket. One sleeve was torn and it was dirty, but there was no blood. We searched the entire area for the next 6 hours. We found nothing else, just the jacket. That's when I started to feel it. That silence. because a jacket can't just fall off a person and drop 40 feet down a cliff on its own. Either he took off his jacket and it blew away, but that doesn't explain why the jacket was torn, or he fell off the cliff and the jacket got caught on something as it fell. But if he fell off the cliff, where was he? Where were the others? The canyon is deep, but not endless. Bodies don't just vanish. We called in technical climbers, and they searched the entire area. There's a talus slope there that drains into the canyon. They searched every rock, every crack. They found nothing. On the fourth day, we expanded the search into the inner part of the canyon. We brought in more dogs and personnel. 20 people participated in the ground search, and the helicopter flew continuously from sunrise to sunset. The dogs kept returning to Hopi Point. They picked up the scent in the park area, followed the trail westward, and lost the scent at the same spot every time. Right at the edge. On the fifth morning, I stood there and looked down. The rock drops vertically about 25 meters before leveling off. Below that is another 1,000 meters of steep slope. I've seen people fall before. You can't forget that image. The body rolls, slides, and finally hits the bottom. You can usually see it from the air because it's the only thing that shouldn't be there. We searched for 5 days but found nothing. On the 6th day, the mother's sister came from Nevada. She asked me the same question again. Where are they? Not what happened to them, just where are they? As if I were hiding them somewhere. I told her everything we did, everything we found, which was almost nothing. She asked if they could have gone into the canyon. I said it was possible, but they had no equipment with them, and the trails into the canyon were well marked. You couldn't just stumble into it. She asked if someone could have kidnapped them. I had no answer for that. There was no motive, no evidence, no witnesses. People don't kidnap an entire family in broad daylight in a national park. But I didn't say it was impossible. We searched for 2 weeks. That's longer than usual, but the park ranger was under pressure from the media. 4 people don't just vanish. The story was on the national news for days. Volunteers came from everywhere, people who do search and rescue as a hobby. Some were helpful, others were just in the way. We searched every mile within 10 miles of the South Rim. We checked every known side canyon, every drainage, every cave entrance. We looked at visitor logs and tracked everyone who had entered that same week to see if anyone had seen anything. No one had. It was as if the Caldwell family had gotten out of their car and walked into a hole in the ground. On the 16th day, we found the second piece. A hiker was returning late in the afternoon from the Bright Angel Trail and saw something on the edge of the trail near the 3-mile rest house. It was a cell phone. It had no case. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. It belonged to one of the kids. The younger one, aged 14. The phone was locked, and we had to send it to a lab to access it. It took 3 days. When we finally got to it, the last thing in the photo gallery was a video. It was 32 seconds long. It had been taken on the first day they arrived. I've probably watched that video dozens of times. I still see it when I close my eyes. The video starts with the younger boy filming his older brother. They're standing at a viewpoint, which looks like Mather Point from the angle. The older brother makes faces at the camera and laughs. You can hear the wind and other tourists in the background. Then the camera turns and you see the mother and father standing near the edge. They're not looking at the camera. They are looking at the canyon. The father has his arm around his wife's shoulders, but she is standing stiffly as if she doesn't want him to touch her. The video quality isn't very good, but you can see the woman's face, and she looks very scared. Not tense, scared, as if she is looking at something that shouldn't be there. The father says something, but the wind drowns him out. The mother takes a step back from the edge. Then the video cuts out. That was it. The last recorded moment we have of them. I had the technical team analyze the metadata. The video was taken at 4:37 p.m. on the day they arrived. almost exactly the same time the old woman said she saw the mother crying on the bench. I went back to Mather Point and stood where I thought they had been standing. I tried to see what the mother was looking at. There was nothing there, just the canyon, just rock, air, and a chasm so deep your mind can't comprehend it. I stood there for an hour, and all I felt was the wind, the sun on my face, and the silence beginning to settle in my chest. The phone was found on the Bright Angel Trail. This is on the opposite side of the village from Hopi Point, where we found the jacket. There are 3 miles between them. For both items to end up where they were found, the family would have had to split up, turn back, or taken a logical route. We retraced all possible paths, nothing connected. Judging by the weather-related damage, the phone had been outside for at least a week, but we didn't know if it had been there since day 1 or if someone had dropped it later. There were no fingerprints on it other than the child's. When we found it, the battery was at 4%. The battery died the first time we tried to unlock it. We continued searching for another week, but by then we all knew we wouldn't find them. The Park Service doesn't like to cancel searches, but at a certain point you're just wasting resources. We went into observation mode. That means we kept our eyes open, but we weren't actively searching anymore. If a hiker found something, we would intervene. Otherwise, the case would just remain open, but cold. I'd seen this before. People go into the canyon and don't come out, eventually becoming another name in the missing persons database. But 4 people at once, an entire family, that was a new situation. It was bothering everyone. The sister stayed in Flagstaff for another month. Every few days she would call me and ask if there were any new developments. I always said no, because there weren't any. Once she asked me if I thought they were dead. I said I didn't know. She asked me what I really thought, off the record. I told her I hadn't seen a case like this in 11 years, and that I had no logical explanation. She asked if I thought all 4 had jumped. I said no. You can always tell when someone plans to jump. They choose a specific spot, leave things behind, there's a pattern. This wasn't like that. Then she asked what it was. I didn't answer. 6 weeks after they went missing, I was on routine patrol duty on the Rim Trail. It was in the afternoon, the same time they had gone missing. The summer crowds were gone, and there were only me and a few scattered hikers. I hadn't been there since we ended the search, so I stopped at Hopi Point. I stood at the edge, where the dogs had lost the scent, and looked down. The light was turning orange, and the shadows in the canyon were lengthening. That's when I heard it. It was a voice, faint, coming from below the edge. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone was calling out. I grabbed my radio and reported the situation, then got my climbing gear out of the truck and descended to the first terrace. By then, the voice had stopped. I waited 10 minutes listening. There was nothing but the wind. I called out a few times. No answer. I climbed back up and searched the edge for another hour. Found nothing. When I got back to the station, I wrote a report. Hayes said I had probably heard another hiker on the trail below and that the canyon echoed. That happens sometimes. The acoustics here do strange things. Maybe, I said. But I didn't believe it. 2 weeks later, I heard it again. Same place, same time. This time, I wasn't alone. A couple from Colorado was standing at a viewpoint, and they heard it too. The man asked me if someone was in trouble down there. I said I'd check and told them to continue on their way. I didn't want them following me back down. I went back down to the same terrace and this time went further, down to the 2nd level. We don't usually go there because it's not a designated climbing route, but I wanted to be sure. I spent 2 hours trying to get past that slope. I found nothing. No people, no tracks, no equipment. When I came back up, the couple was gone and the sun was setting. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and tried to convince myself it was the wind, birds, or some other logical thing. But I've been working here for 11 years. I know the sound of the wind. I know the language of birds. This was a sound. A human sound. And this sound was coming from the place where 4 people disappeared and we found no trace, only a torn jacket and a broken phone that explained nothing. After that, I stopped going to Hopi Point. Not officially, I just redirected my patrols to other areas. Hayes noticed and asked me about it. I told him I had no problem. He didn't press the issue. The Caldwell case is still open. Every few months, someone from the media calls to ask if there's been any progress. I say no. My sister stopped calling after Christmas. I don't blame her. What else is there to say? Sometimes I think about that video, her mother's face, the way she looked into the canyon, as if she saw something the camera couldn't capture. I also think about her father's arm around her mother's shoulders, and her mother standing there firmly, not backing away but not bending either. I think about their car filled with camping gear they never used, and the 4 of them disappearing a few hours after they arrived, with no one seeing them leave. I think about the jacket without a body 40 feet below the edge, and the phone found on a trail 3 miles away, where there was no reason for them to go. But mostly I think about the sound. The sound I heard twice, and the people from Colorado heard once. I think it came from the same narrow ledge section where everything happened. I think about the dogs losing the scent after leading us there, as if the scent had suddenly vanished. I've been a park ranger here for 11 years, and have seen people fall, disappear, make foolish decisions that cost them their lives. But I've never seen anything like this. 3 months ago, the Park Service officially suspended the status of the Caldwell case. This means they are presumed dead, but we are no longer searching for them. The file is put in a cabinet and stays there unless someone finds remains or new evidence. I have a copy of the case notes in my truck. Sometimes, on quiet days, I take them out and read them, looking for something I might have missed. A detail that would make everything make sense. I never find it. Last week, I was training a new park ranger, and we went to Hopi Point because he wanted to see the view. It was early morning, not the same time I heard the sound, but I still didn't want to be there. We stopped at the edge. He was taking pictures and telling me how beautiful it was. I wasn't listening. I was looking at the terrace 40 feet below where the jacket was found. The morning light was hitting it at an angle I'd never seen before, and I could see the broken line on the rock running parallel to the edge. It was wider than I remembered. It was as if it had opened up since I was last there. The new ranger asked me something, but I didn't hear him. He asked again. He wanted to know if anyone had gone missing during my shift. Yes, I said. He asked what happened. I said we never found them. He asked if I thought they were still out there somewhere. I looked at him, then back at the crack in the rock, and said I didn't know. He nodded, as if it were a reasonable answer, and we got back in the truck. I've been working as a ranger here for 11 years, and now I know nothing. I don't know where the Caldwell family went. I don't know why the dogs lost the scent at the same spot. I don't know whose voice was coming from below the edge. I don't know why that broken line looks wider than it did 3 months ago. The only thing I know is that there's a section of the south rim where the rocks are unstable and the canyon drops a mile down. And sometimes when the wind blows in the right direction and the light dims, you hear a sound like someone calling out. But when you go to look, there's nothing there. Just silence. And I know that within that silence, there are 4 people who got out of their cars one September afternoon and never came back. The case file is still in my truck. I don't read it anymore. The thing about working the night shift at the Grand Canyon is that you learn very quickly how sound travels differently after dark. During the day, the canyon swallows everything. Sounds, footsteps, Even the sound of helicopter blades are sucked into that void. But at night, after the tourists leave and the air cools, the canyon settles like a basin filled with water, and sound does strange things. It echoes. It travels far. Sometimes it comes from illogical directions. I learned this 9 years ago, during my first week on the job. I wish that had been the only thing I learned. It was mid-October when I met Marcus Webb. I was doing a final check of the Desert View area, making absolutely sure everyone had left before locking the doors. Desert View is at the eastern end of the park, about 25 miles from Grand Canyon Village, and it's not as crowded as the South Rim views. It usually empties out by 6 p.m. That night, one car remained in the parking lot. A white Honda with California plates. I pulled up alongside it and saw a man in the driver's seat looking at a map. I tapped on the window and he rolled it down. He was in his 30s, clean cut, wearing a college sweatshirt. He had the friendly face people wear when they're tense about something but trying not to show it. He said his name was Marcus and that he was about to finish up, hadn't noticed how time had passed taking pictures. I told him the park was about to close and he needed to leave. He nodded and started folding his map. Then he asked me something that should have been a warning. He asked if people camped here illegally, meaning if they spent the night in the parking lot. No, I said, we patrol regularly, and anyone who tries gets fined. Okay, he said, and thanked me. I watched him drive toward the exit. Later, I thought about that conversation, the way he asked it. He didn't ask if camping was allowed, he asked if people did it. It was as if he was testing to see if he could get away with something. At the time, I thought he was just another tourist trying to save money on a hotel. We encounter situations like that often. I finished my patrol and returned to the ranger station, and 3 days later, with his car still parked at Desert View and no one having seen him leave, I thought about Marcus Webb again. The gatekeeper was the first to notice. The same white Honda, in the same spot, hadn't moved. He looked at the license plate, and it turned out to belong to Marcus Webb, with an address in San Diego. He reported it, and I went there with another ranger named Cole. We checked the car. It wasn't locked. The keys were in the ignition. His wallet, ID, and credit cards were still inside, sitting in the cup holder. There was a camera on the passenger seat and a half-empty water bottle on the console. The map he had been looking at was folded on the dashboard. I picked it up and opened it. It was a topographic map of the Desert View area, and he had marked several points along the edge with a red pen. A small X marks, 5 of them, all in places where there were no official viewing terraces. Cole asked me if I had seen him. I recounted the conversation from 3 nights earlier. He asked if the man had seemed strange. No, just curious, I said. Cole looked at the marked map and said maybe he was too curious. We reported it and initiated the standard search protocol. First, we checked around the car, then expanded to the locations marked on the map. The first 3 points were easy to reach, just a short walk from the roadside parking areas. We found nothing. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. Reaching the 4th point was much harder. It required climbing over the protective barrier and walking along a narrow ledge that curved outward. I went first. The ledge was maybe a meter wide, with a canyon wall on one side and a steep drop-off on the other. About 15 meters ahead, I found the spot where he had been. There were scratch marks on the ground, as if someone had knelt there. The dust was disturbed in a circular pattern about a meter in diameter. At the edge of the cliff, there were 2 handprints in the dirt, small indentations where someone had pressed their palms into the ground, as if leaning forward and looking down. I called Cole, and we both stood there looking at those handprints. Their position was wrong. If you're leaning over looking down, you keep your hands behind you for balance. These were in front, fingers pointing to the edge, as if reaching for something. We searched that ledge for 2 hours. We found nothing else. No clothing, no equipment, no fall mark. I lay on my stomach and looked over the edge. There was a vertical drop of about 30 meters, then it turned into a steep slope covered with loose rocks. If someone fell, they would hit that slope and either stop there or slide further down. I called for a helicopter to survey the area below. They arrived an hour later and searched until dark. They found nothing. The pilot said that if someone had fallen recently, the rocks would have shifted or there would be some kind of impact mark. The slope looked undisturbed. That night, I pulled Marcus Webb's data from the park entrance records. He had entered 5 days before we found him in the parking lot. He was alone. He didn't have a camping permit, just a day pass, but he'd been here for 5 days. That meant he was either camping illegally, sleeping in his car, or both. The gatekeeper said he didn't remember his car leaving and coming back, which probably meant he'd been in the park the whole time. 5 days. Where was he sleeping? What was he doing? I looked at the map again. 5 locations were marked. We had searched 4 of them. The 5th marker was in an area called Comanche Point, about 3 miles east of Desert View. There was no road access to it. You had to walk there. Cole and I went there the next morning. It took us a while to reach the coordinates on the map. Comanche Point is not an official viewing point, just a cliff edge that juts out further than the others. The rocks there are unstable, with lots of loose rock fragments and cracks. We are not promoting this place because we don't want people going there. When we reached the spot Marcus had marked, we found the campsite, or what was left of it. There was a small tent, still pitched, its door open. Inside was a sleeping bag, its zipper open and a half of it sticking out, as if someone had hurriedly left. A backpack leaned against a rock, still containing food and clothes. There were marks all over the ground around the tent. They looked like handprints on the ledge, but there were dozens of them. Handprints, footprints, knee marks, drag marks, all clustered roughly in a circle around the tent. The pattern didn't make sense. It looked as if someone had crawled on their hands and knees for hours. Some of the marks were layered on top of each other. Some were so deep that fingers had dug into the hardened soil. Cole stood at the edge of the circle and said nothing for a long time. Then he asked me if I thought these could have been made by animals. No, I said. These were human, fresh, maybe from the day before. We examined the campsite like a crime scene. We took photos, put the tent and sleeping bag in bags, recorded everything in the backpack. There was a diary in one of the side pockets. I opened it and turned the pages. Most were normal hiking notes, times, dates, and landscape observations. But the last few entries were different. The handwriting had become more scattered and difficult to read. The entry from 2 days ago simply said, "It shouldn't look like this from this angle." Yesterday's entry said, "I can see where it's going now. I was wrong about the depth." The last entry, before the night we found the car, was a single sentence. "These aren't echoes." I showed it to Cole. He read it, looked at me, and asked what it meant. I said I didn't know. We gathered everything and loaded it into the truck. On the way, I kept thinking about those words. They're not echoes. Echoes of what? Sound. The only thing that echoes is sound. That meant Marcus had heard something here, at night, alone. And whatever he heard, he had decided it wasn't an echo. We ran his journal and other belongings through evidence processing. Nothing unusual came up. Our tests showed no drugs in his system, no history of mental illness. He was a graduate student studying geology at UC San Diego. He had come to the Grand Canyon to conduct field research on rock formations. His advisor confirmed that he had been planning this trip for months and had obtained all the necessary academic permissions. A normal guy. A normal trip. Except for the 5 marked locations, the handprints, and the nonsensical journal entries. The search continued non-stop for a week. We brought in dogs and more personnel and searched every inch of the rim from Desert View to Comanche Point. The dogs picked up his scent at all 5 marked locations, but that was all. There was no trail leading away, no direction we could follow. At each point, the scent just abruptly stopped. The dog trainer said it was as if that person had only been in those specific places and nowhere else. I asked if that was possible. He said no, but he couldn't explain what his dogs were telling him. On the 8th day, we found the camera. A hiker spotted it wedged in a crack about 3 meters below the rim, near the second marked location. He rappelled down, and we retrieved the camera. It was the same model as the one in Marcus Webb's car. The lens was broken, but the memory card was intact. We extracted the photos and examined them. There were hundreds of photos. Most were standard landscape shots, different angles of the canyon, rock formations, the kind of things you'd expect from a geology student. But the last 30 photos had all been taken at night. They were long exposure photos, the kind taken to capture stars. But these weren't pointed at the sky, they were pointed into the canyon. Each photo showed the same basic image: the rim in the foreground, a black void below, and small points of light within that void. At first, I thought they were stars reflecting off the rocks or lights coming from the river, but their positions were wrong. They were too high to be lights on the canyon floor and too low to be stars. They hung at a medium distance, suspended in the darkness as if floating. Cole thought they were camera artifacts or lens flares. We sent the photos to a technical analyst who was an expert in photography. He came back 2 days later and said they weren't artifacts. The lights were real. Something below the canyon was emitting light, and Marcus Webb had photographed it over several nights. The analyst counted the lights in each photo. The number was increasing. There were 3 lights in the first photo. In the last photo, there were 17 lights. The lights were always in slightly different positions, never appearing in the same place twice, constantly moving. I studied those photos for minutes. I tried to figure out why. Maybe they were hikers' flashlights, but there is no trail in that part of the canyon, and why would 17 different people be there in the dark? It could be bioluminescent bacteria, but there's nothing like that in this environment. It could be a reflection of something, but a reflection of what? When I looked at the photos again, all the explanations I had come up with fell apart. The lights were there. They were moving. Their number was increasing, and Marcus Webb was documenting them. The last photo on the camera was different from the others. It wasn't a long exposure. It was a normal photo taken with the flash on. The image was overexposed and hard to make out, but you could make out the edge of the rim and a section of the canyon wall just below it, and on a narrow ledge about 20 feet below, a figure stood. A dark silhouette, looking at the camera. It was human-shaped, but the proportions looked wrong. The arms might have been too long, or the torso too narrow. The flash had reflected off something near where the head should have been. 2 bright spots that looked like eyes, but it could have been something else. It could have been rocks. It could have been equipment. The photo's timestamp was 11:47 p.m. the night before we found the car. I showed the photo to Cole and asked him what he thought it was. He looked at the photo for a long time and then said it was Marcus. It had to be. Who else could be there? I asked him if the proportions looked right. He said the angle was strange, that it was hard to tell. I said the protrusion in the photo was just below Comanche Point, where we found the campsite, and if that figure was Marcus, then how did he get down there in the dark without equipment? And then what happened? He climbed back up. He vanished. Cole had no answer. Neither did I. We continued the search for another week, but at that point it was just procedure. Everyone knew we wouldn't find him. The Park Service brought in a technical climbing team to search the area below Comanche Point. They searched every ledge and crevice for 3 days. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no equipment. It was as if he had vaporized. On the 17th day, we scaled back the search to a monitoring status. Marcus Webb was entered into the missing persons database. His family came from California, and I had to sit with them and explain that we had done everything we could. His mother asked me if I thought he had fallen. I said it was possible, but we hadn't found any evidence of it. She asked what else could have happened. I didn't answer. After the family left, I said I wanted to work the night shift permanently. I told my supervisor I preferred working nights. He didn't ask why. I started patrolling the Desert View area regularly, especially the 5 points Marcus had marked on his map. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe evidence, or an explanation. Mostly, I walked along the edge after dark and listened. The first time I heard it was about a month after the case was closed. I was at Comanche Point at midnight. I was standing where his tent had been. The air was cold and still. The canyon was completely dark. There was no moon that night. I was about to leave when I heard a sound from below the edge. It was quiet, almost inaudible, like wind passing through a narrow gap. But there was no wind. I stood there listening, and the sound changed. It became rhythmic, a pattern. It almost sounded like breathing, but slower, deeper. I took my flashlight and shone it over the edge. The light didn't reach far enough. It disappeared into the darkness. The sound stopped. A week later, I heard it again. Same place, same time. This time, I was prepared. I had brought my climbing gear. When I heard the breathing sound, I descended to the first ledge, about 30 feet below the edge. I stood there, scanning the canyon wall with my flashlight. There was nothing, just rock and empty air. But the sound was louder now. It was coming from below me. I looked down and saw the light. It was small, maybe a mile away, suspended in the darkness. Just a dot. White-blue in color. I watched it for a few seconds and it moved. It drifted to the left, then stopped, then moved again. I remembered the photos on Marcus's camera. The lights in the canyon. I counted them. Now there were 5, scattered at different depths. They were all moving slowly. They were all the same color. I watched them for 20 minutes, and they never got closer or farther away. They just drifted back and forth as if searching for something. I've been to Comanche Point 17 times in the last 4 months. The lights are always there. Sometimes more, sometimes less. I counted up to 23. They don't come close enough to identify. I photographed them, but the images looked just like Marcus's photos. Just points of light in the dark. No details. No explanation. I haven't told anyone about this. What would I say? That I saw the same things a missing person saw right before they disappeared? That I hear breathing sounds coming from the canyon at night? That sometimes when I stand at the edge I feel something down below staring back at me? Last week I reread Marcus's journal. I read every entry. Most were technical, measurements and observations about erosion patterns and rock strata. But there was an entry I missed before his second night. It was written in small letters at the bottom of the page. It said, "The sense of depth here is wrong." During the day, when I look down, I can see the layers of rock strata and estimate the distance. At night, when I look at the same spot, it looks deeper, as if the bottom has shifted further away. I need to take measurements to verify this. I thought about this for a long time. Then I returned to Comanche Point during the day. I stood at the edge and looked down. The canyon looked the same as always. Huge, complex, but understandable. I could see the rock layers, the shadows indicating depth, the terraced sections of the walls. My brain could process it. Then I returned that same night. I stood at the exact same spot. I looked down, and he was right. It looked different, deeper. The layers I had seen during the day were gone. The terraces had vanished. There was only darkness stretching downward, and it was unclear where it ended, or if it ended at all. I stood there for an hour trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I told myself it was an optical illusion, a play of light and shadow. But I've been working here for 9 years. I know how this canyon looks in all kinds of light. This was different. This was wrong. Standing there, I heard the breathing sound again and counted 11 lights moving in the darkness, and I thought of Marcus Webb's last journal entry. These aren't echoes. I think I understand what you mean now. When you're here at night and you hear something moving in the canyon, your first instinct is to assume it's an echo. The sound bouncing off the walls. But echoes have a source. They're the reflection of something real. What Marcus understood, and what I'm beginning to understand, is that some of the sounds here have no source. They don't come from anywhere. They don't bounce off anything. They're just there. They exist in that space. And when you realize that, when you accept that what you're hearing isn't the echo of something else but the thing itself, you have to ask what's making that sound. I don't go to Comanche Point as often as I used to. Maybe once a week. I tell myself I'm monitoring the area for safety reasons, but that's not true. I'm watching the lights. I'm counting them. Their number is increasing, slowly but steadily. When I first started recording them, there were 7. Last week, there were 29. I don't know what will happen when the number increases. I don't know if there's a limit. 3 nights ago, around 1 o'clock, I was there and saw something I hadn't seen before. One of the lights approached. It didn't come right up to the edge, but it was closer than they usually come. Maybe half a mile instead of a mile. I watched it through my binoculars. It was still too far away to see details, but I could tell it was moving differently than the others, more purposefully, as if it were searching for something. It drifted back and forth along the same section of the canyon wall for nearly an hour, then descended and disappeared. The other lights continued moving as if nothing had happened. I had my climbing gear with me that night. I considered going down, to follow it, to see what it was. I went as far as setting up the rope and putting on my harness. Then I stood at the edge and looked into the darkness and thought of Marcus Webb. I thought of the handprints at the edge of the cliff, his fingers pointing down as if reaching for something. I thought of the figure in his last photo, standing 20 feet below the edge, looking disproportionate. I thought about his tent, surrounded by tracks in the mud, as if he had crawled around in the dark for hours. Then I took off my harness, gathered my gear, and left. I won't go back to Comanche Point. I've been telling myself that for 3 days. I volunteered for extra shifts in other parts of the park to find an excuse not to go, but I know I will go. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not this week. But eventually I will return because I need to know what those lights are. I need to know what Marcus Webb saw. I need to know if the canyon really is deeper at night, or if it's just a problem with my perception. I need to know what made that breathing sound, and why it stopped when I shone the light on it. Marcus Webb's file is still on my desk. Sometimes I read it, looking for something I might have missed, a clue that might explain where he went or what he found. He's listed as missing, probably dead, but there's no body and no evidence of how he died. All we have is a tent, a diary, and a camera filled with photos of lights in the dark and a figure on a ledge that could be him or something else. That's all we have. Unless someone else goes down there and finds something we couldn't, that's all we'll ever have. I've been a park ranger at the Grand Canyon for 9 years. I know the protocols. I know the statistics. I know that dozens of people go missing in national parks every year, and most are never found. The wilderness is vast and indifferent, and it keeps its secrets. I've always believed that. But standing at Comanche Point at night, looking into a darkness that seemed deeper than it should be, watching lights move in the void, hearing sounds with no apparent source, I no longer know what to believe. Last night, I broke protocol. I went to Comanche Point without telling anyone and stayed there until 3 in the morning. The lights were there. This time, there were 31 of them. I counted twice to be sure. They moved almost in coordination, as if communicating with each other. I watched a group of 5 approach the canyon wall and then separate, each rising to a different height. They stayed like that for about 20 minutes, and then came back together. I took pictures, but I know they won't be of any use. Just points of light. Just proof of something I can't explain. As I watched, I heard the breathing sound again. It was louder than before. It was coming from multiple directions. I turned off my flashlight and stood in the dark, listening. The pattern was complex, it wasn't random. There were pauses and variations like speech. It was as if something was trying to communicate. I stood there listening for 30 minutes, and the whole time I thought about Marcus Webb's journal. These aren't echoes. They aren't echoes because an echo is a reflection, and you can't reflect something that doesn't exist. But these sounds exist. These lights exist. That means whatever created them exists. I didn't descend. I wanted to. I had the equipment. But I didn't because I wasn't sure I could get back out. That's the truth. Marcus Webb went there looking for something and never came back. I don't think it was because he fell. I think he found what he was looking for, and it was something that wouldn't let you leave once you saw it. I think those lights are people, or were people, or something that used to be human. I think the breathing sound is because they're trying to communicate, and the reason the sound stops when I hold the light is because they're not ready for me yet. I think Marcus is down there with them right now. I think he's one of those lights. I haven't written any report about this. What would I write? That 4 months ago, I saw unexplained events in a section of the canyon where a man disappeared. That I think he's still there, but not in a logical way. That the canyon is deeper at night than during the day, and that something moves in that extra depth. They'd take me off duty. They'd send me to a psychologist. And maybe they'd be right. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there. But the photos are real. Marcus's photos and mine. The lights are documented. They exist. I'm writing this because I think I'll go back. Not tonight, but soon. I'll get my climbing gear and rope down to that ledge where Marcus took his last photo. I'll see what's there. I need to know. I've been a park ranger for 9 years, and I've seen people make foolish decisions, ignore warning signs, put themselves in danger because they think they know better. I know this is that kind of decision. I know I shouldn't go, but I'm going anyway because not knowing is worse than any answer I might find. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come back. My truck will be at Comanche Point. The climbing gear will be ready on the side. You'll find this notebook in the cabin. I'm leaving copies of Marcus Webb's photos and my own documents there. I don't want you to come looking for me. I want you to close off that area. Set up barriers. Don't let anyone go to Comanche Point at night. Don't let anyone else see the lights. Because once you see them, you can't stop thinking about them. You can't help but wonder what they are. And eventually, that curiosity becomes a need. The need turns into an urge, and then at 3 in the morning, you find yourself standing at the edge of the cliff with climbing gear, a headlamp, and a decision you know is wrong but will make anyway. There are 5 marked locations in Marcus Webb's file. I searched for 4 of them. I didn't go to the 5th. It's marked on the eastern edge of the map, beyond Comanche Point, in an unnamed area. There's no trail there, no road access. You have to walk for hours across rugged terrain. I don't know why he marked it. I don't know if he ever went there. But I think that's where I need to go. Not into the canyon, to the 5th marked spot. Because if Marcus found something that changed his perception of the canyon, something that made him write those journal entries, take those photos, and ultimately disappear, maybe it all started at that fifth spot. Maybe the answer is there. I'm going tomorrow. I've even marked the route. It's a 10-hour round-trip hike. I'll set out at dawn, and if all goes well, I'll be back by sunset. I won't tell anyone where I'm going. I'll just take my gear, water, and this notebook. When I reach the fifth marker, I'll record what I find. If I find anything, if there's nothing there, I'll turn back and probably never go to Comanche Point again. But if there is something, if Marcus left something, or if there's an explanation for the lights, the sounds, or all of this, then I'll have my answer. It's 4 a.m. right now. I should try to sleep before the hike, but I don't think I'll be able to. I can't stop thinking about those lights. There were 31 of them in my last count. I can't stop thinking about Marcus Webb's last photo. The figure at the edge of the cliff. The proportions that didn't look right. I can't stop thinking about the breathing sound and how it's become more complex over the months. More regular. As if learning. Or as if calling. Canyon nights are different. I always knew that, but I never understood what it meant until now. Not just darker. Not just quieter. Deeper. When the sun goes down, there's more emptiness inside. More space for things that aren't there during the day. Marcus Webb discovered that. He measured it somehow. Proved it. Then he went looking for whatever filled that extra emptiness. I'll find what he found. Or I'll vanish like he did. Either way, someone will know I tried. The sun is rising, time to go. The radio call came at 2:37 p.m. on a Thursday in late April. I remember the exact time because I was filling out maintenance reports and had written the date at the top of the form. The dispatcher said there was a situation at Yavapai Point. A woman was reporting that her hiking companion was missing. Not fallen, not lost. Missing. Those were the exact words the dispatcher used, and I remember thinking it was a strange expression. People don't get lost. They go somewhere. But I took the call and went there, and that's when I met Sarah Lindeman, and I learned that sometimes disappeared is the only appropriate word. When I arrived, Sarah was sitting on a bench near the overlook. She was in her 40s, athletic, dressed in appropriate hiking clothes. She wasn't crying or panicking. She was just sitting motionless with her hands clasped in her lap, staring at nothing. I introduced myself and asked her to tell me what had happened. She looked at me for a few seconds as if trying to decide whether to believe me or not. Then she told me her friend had gone missing, and she didn't know where he had gone because she had been looking at him when it happened. His name was David Chen. They had driven in from Phoenix that morning to take photos together. Sarah said they had been friends for 6 years and often went on trips like this. They had arrived around noon and spent a few hours hiking and taking photos on the rim trail. Around 2 p.m, they had stopped to rest at Yavapai Point. Sarah said she had sat on the same bench and drank water. David was standing on the railing about 5 meters away. Sarah said she was watching him because he was preparing to take a shot with his camera, and she wanted to wait for him to finish and then continue walking. She said she looked away for maybe 3 seconds to check her phone. When she looked back, David was gone. I asked if he had said anything about going somewhere else. No, she said. I asked if he had gone to the restroom or back to the parking lot. She said she had already checked. His car was still there. His backpack was on the ground next to the railing where he had been standing. She had searched everywhere within a 100-meter radius. She called his phone and heard it ringing in his backpack. He had searched for her for 30 minutes before calling the police. I asked him if he was absolutely sure he had seen her just before she disappeared. Yes, he said. He looked directly at her. then looked at his phone, and when he looked back, she was no longer there. I walked over to the railing where David had been standing. The backpack was there, just as the woman had said. It was a nice camera bag, looked expensive. His phone was in his side pocket. I looked over the railing. Yavapai Point has a low wall, and then the ground slopes gradually for about 10 feet and then drops off steeply. You can see that slope clearly from the railing. No one was there. I scanned the area below with binoculars. The canyon wall extends nearly vertically for about 90 meters before reaching the terraces. I saw nothing. No one, no movement, no fall marks. I reported the situation, and we initiated the standard search protocol. Within 20 minutes, 2 more rangers arrived, and we spread out to scan the area. We searched every lookout point within a quarter mile. We checked the parking lots, the visitor center, the restrooms, the service stops. We found nothing, absolutely nothing. No one witnessed him leaving. No one but Sarah remembered seeing him. An hour later, we called in the dog team. The dogs picked up a scent trail from the parking lot to Yavapai Point, and the trail ended at the railing. Suddenly, it stopped. The dog handler had the dogs circle the entire area twice. The dogs kept returning to the same spot and sitting down. When the trail ends, when there is nowhere else to go, dogs are trained to behave this way. Sarah stayed with us the entire time. She answered all our questions. She gave us photos from her phone so we could see what David looked like. Asian male, early 40s, about 5'10", wearing a blue jacket and hiking boots. He gave us his emergency contact information, home address, and work information. He was calm, cooperative, and helpful. But there was something in his eyes that bothered me. It wasn't exactly fear. It was more like confusion. As if he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. We searched until dark but found nothing. At that point, I had to make a decision. We could continue searching throughout the night with lights and more personnel, or we could wait until morning and conduct a full daytime search with helicopter support. I looked at Sarah and asked her honest opinion. Did she think David might have left this area on his own for any reason? Could he have entered the canyon without telling her? No, she said, absolutely not. They had been planning this trip for weeks. David was very excited. There was no reason for him to leave, but every reason for him to stay. I called for the helicopter. By 7 o'clock, the helicopter with thermal imaging capabilities was airborne. If David was injured, hiding, or stranded somewhere, the camera would detect his heat signature. The pilot searched a 3-mile radius from Yavapai Point. He scanned the edges, the upper trails, the accessible parts of the inner canyon. He flew low enough to see anyone there. He found nothing. There were no heat signatures except for wild animals. At 9 o'clock p.m., if David Chen was in the search area, I had to accept that he was somewhere we couldn't see him. Or he was somewhere we could see him, but he no longer looked human. Sarah refused to leave. She said she'd wait in the parking lot. I tried to convince her to get a hotel room in the village, but she insisted on staying close to where she'd last seen him. I didn't argue. She sat in her car, and I went back to the station to start the paperwork. Missing person report, search log, witness statements. I'd done it before, but this one felt different. The details were too clean, too simple. Man standing at railing. Woman looks away, man gone. No evidence of where he went, no footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle or a fall. Just absence. The next morning we expanded the search. Brought in more personnel, more dogs, technical climbers to check the canyon walls. We set up a grid pattern and covered every inch of the rim area. Checked every crack in the rock, every drainage, every possible place a person could be. We went through David's backpack, found his wallet, his keys, his phone, like Sarah had said. Also found 3 bottles of water, energy bars, a first aid kit, sunscreen. Everything you'd bring for a day hike. Nothing that suggested he was planning to go far. His camera was still in the bag, expensive digital camera with a full memory card. I went through the photos. The last one was taken at 1:53 p.m. A landscape shot of the canyon from Yavapai Point. Clear focus, good composition. The kind of photo someone takes when they're enjoying themselves and not planning to disappear 40 minutes later. We interviewed everyone who'd been at Yavapai Point that afternoon. The park keeps a rough count of visitors at popular overlooks, and there had been maybe 20 people in the area between 1 and 3 p.m. We tracked down 12 of them. None of them remembered seeing David Chen. A couple remembered seeing Sarah sitting on the bench. One person thought they might have seen someone at the railing wearing blue, but they weren't sure. No one saw him leave. No one saw anything unusual. On day 3, Sarah's phone rang. She answered it in front of me. It was David's mother calling from California. Sarah had to tell her that David was missing. I watched her face while she talked. She stayed calm, gave the facts, didn't speculate. But when she hung up, she looked at me and said something I still think about. She said David's mother had asked if he'd fallen, and Sarah had said she didn't think so. Then she'd asked why not, and Sarah said because there would be signs. The mother asked what kind of signs, and Sarah had paused for a long time before saying, "I don't know, but there would be something." We kept the active search going for a week, standard protocol for a missing person case in the park. After that, we scaled back to monitoring status unless new evidence turned up. Sarah stayed for all 7 days. She didn't leave the park once. Every morning, she'd come to the station and ask if there was anything new. Every evening, I'd have to tell her no. On the 8th day, she finally left. She gave me her number and made me promise to call if we found anything. I promised. I didn't tell her that finding something was becoming less likely with every day that passed. I started going to Yavapai Point on my regular patrols. Not for any official reason. I just wanted to stand where David Chen had been standing and try to understand what had happened. The point is busy during the day. Lots of tourists taking photos and looking at the view. I started going at night when it was empty. I'd stand at the railing where his backpack had been and look down into the canyon. During the day, you can see the geological layers clearly. The Kaibab limestone at the top, then the Toraweep Formation, the Coconino Sandstone, all the way down to the Vishnu Schist at the bottom. At night, you can't see any of that. It's just darkness. Your eyes try to find depth cues, but there's nothing to lock onto. After a while, you start to feel like you're looking at a flat black wall that goes on forever. About 2 weeks after David disappeared, I was at Yavapai Point around 11 p.m., just standing there like I'd been doing. The wind was calm, and I could hear voices from the village about a mile away. That's one of the things about the canyon at night. Sound carries in unexpected ways. You hear things from miles away like they're right next to you. I was listening to those distant voices when I heard something closer. A voice directly below me. Quiet, almost a whisper, but distinct. It said, "Help." I turned on my flashlight and pointed it over the railing. The beam hit the slope and then fell away into the darkness below. I called out, asked if anyone was down there. No response. I waited 5 minutes listening. Nothing. I radioed it in, and 2 other rangers came out. We searched the area with lights. Didn't find anyone. The other rangers said I'd probably heard someone on the rim trail and the acoustics had made it sound like it was coming from below. I said maybe, but I didn't believe it. I heard it again 3 nights later. Same location, same time. This time, I was ready. I had climbing gear in my truck and I set it up immediately. I rappelled down to the first slope about 30 feet below the rim. It's not a sanctioned climbing area, but I know the rock there, know it's stable enough for a quick descent. I swept my light across the slope. Nothing. I called out again. The voice came back, "Help," louder this time, coming from further down. I looked over the edge of the slope. It drops almost vertical from there. I'd need more rope, more gear. I radioed for backup and waited. Another ranger arrived 20 minutes later. His name was Walker. He'd been with the park for 15 years, longer than me. I told him what I'd heard. He listened and didn't say anything for a while. Then he asked if I'd been getting enough sleep. I said yes. He asked if I was sure. I said I'd heard a voice, clear as anything, coming from below the rim. He said the canyon does strange things with sound, and we'd already searched this area thoroughly. There was no one down there. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. We climbed back up, and he suggested I take a few days off. I didn't take his advice. A month after David Chen disappeared, Sarah called me. She asked if there had been any developments. I told her no. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if I'd been back to Yavapai Point. I said yes. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual there. I asked what she meant. She said she'd been having dreams about that day. In the dreams, she was sitting on the bench watching David. He was standing at the railing with his camera, but in the dreams, when she looked away and looked back, he wasn't gone. He was still there, still standing in the same position, still holding his camera, but something about him was different. She couldn't explain what, just that when she looked at him in the dream, she knew he wasn't the same person anymore. I asked her what she thought that meant. She said she didn't know. Then she asked me a question that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She asked if I believed it was possible for a person to be in two places at once. Not physically, but in some other way. Like maybe part of them could be in one place while another part was somewhere else. I told her I didn't know. She said she'd been researching missing person cases in national parks. There were hundreds of them, thousands if you counted all the parks in the country. And a lot of them had the same pattern. Person there one moment, gone the next. No trace, no evidence, no logical explanation. She said she'd found forums where people discuss theories. Some of them thought there were places in nature where the laws of physics worked differently. Places where people could slip through into somewhere else. I told her that sounded like pseudoscience. She agreed. But then she asked me how else I'd explain what happened to David. I didn't have an answer. She thanked me for taking her call and hung up. I sat there for a long time after thinking about what she'd said. Places where people could slip through. I'd worked at the Grand Canyon for 8 years at that point. I'd seen people fall. I'd seen people get lost. I'd seen people make terrible decisions and pay for them. But I'd never seen someone just disappear with no explanation. Until David Chen. I started looking into what Sarah had mentioned. The other missing person cases. I pulled files from the park archive going back 20 years. Found 37 cases where people had vanished without a trace. Not fallen, not wandered off, vanished. Most of them were single individuals. A few were pairs. In every case, the pattern was similar. Person was seen in a specific location. Brief period where no one was watching them. Person gone. Searches turned up nothing. Cases went cold. I made a list of the locations where these disappearances had happened. 17 different spots spread out across the park. I marked them on a map. There was no obvious pattern. No clustering around dangerous areas or remote trails. They were scattered randomly, or what looked like randomly. I spent 3 nights studying that map before I saw it. The locations weren't random. They were all places where the rim geometry created a specific kind of sightline. Places where if you stood at the edge and looked down, the angle of the canyon walls created an optical effect. The walls converged in a way that made the depth hard to judge. Your eyes couldn't find a fixed point to measure distance. During the day, your brain compensates for this using the visible rock layers as reference. But at night or in certain lighting conditions, that reference disappears. You're left looking at a space that your brain can't properly process. A space that looks deeper than it should be. Yavapai Point was one of those locations. I went there the next day during different times to test the sightline. At noon, with the sun directly overhead, the canyon looked normal. I could see the layers, estimate the depth, understand the geometry. At 6 p.m., with the sun setting behind me, the light changed. The layers became less distinct. The depth became harder to judge. At 8 p.m. in twilight, the canyon looked completely different. The walls seemed to converge further out. The bottom seemed further down. My brain kept telling me something was wrong with the perspective, but I couldn't identify what. I thought about David Chen standing at that railing at 2 p.m. The sun would have been at a specific angle. The shadows would have been falling in a specific way. I pulled up a sun position calculator and entered the date and time. Then I went back to Yavapai Point at the exact same time of day. Stood at the exact same spot. Looked down. The convergence was there. Subtle, but present. The angle of the walls created a sight line that led your eyes down, and at a certain point your brain lost the ability to track the distance. It was like looking at an optical illusion. You knew there was a bottom somewhere, but you couldn't quite see where it was. I took photos and sent them to a friend who taught physics at Northern Arizona University. Asked him if there was a term for this kind of optical effect. He called me back 2 days later and said what I was describing sounded like a form of perspective distortion. He said it happens in deep canyons and gorges where the walls are steep and the sight lines are long. Your brain uses multiple cues to judge depth, including perspective, relative size, and atmospheric haze. But in certain geometric configurations, those cues contradict each other, and your brain can't resolve the conflict. The result is a space that looks deeper than it actually is, or sometimes a space that looks shallower. He said there was nothing supernatural about it, just a quirk of human perception. I asked him if someone experiencing this effect could become disoriented. He said, possibly. If the distortion was severe enough, it might cause vertigo or spatial confusion. I asked if it could cause someone to fall. He said yes, if they were standing close to an edge and lost their balance. But he said the person would still fall in a normal way. Their body would still be recoverable. There wouldn't be any mystery about what happened. I thanked him and hung up. What he'd told me made sense. It explained why those 17 locations might be prone to disappearances. People standing at the edge experiencing perspective distortion, getting dizzy, falling. Except it didn't explain why we never found the bodies. It didn't explain why David Chen's backpack was still at the railing. It didn't explain why Sarah had been watching him and he'd vanished in the 3 seconds she looked away. It didn't explain the voice I'd heard coming from below the rim saying help. 2 months after David disappeared, I was doing a routine patrol of the rim trail. It was early morning, around 6 a.m. The sun was just coming up and the tourists hadn't arrived yet. I was walking past Yavapai Point when I saw someone standing at the railing. He was wearing a blue jacket. I stopped, got a sick feeling in my stomach. I walked closer. The man turned around. It wasn't David Chen, just another tourist taking early morning photos. I apologized for startling him and moved on, but the encounter shook me. I'd seen a blue jacket at Yavapai Point, and for just a moment I'd thought it was him, thought he'd somehow come back. I started checking the visitor logs more carefully after that, looking for David Chen's name. I knew he wouldn't check in again, but I couldn't help looking. On day 73, I found something. A visitor had signed in at the South Rim entrance at 5:30 a.m. The signature was illegible, but the vehicle description matched David's car. Silver Honda Civic, California plates. I pulled the plate number. It was his. I got in my truck and drove to the entrance station. Asked the attendant if they remembered the car. They said no. Lots of cars come through. I asked them to check the gate camera footage. They pulled it up. Silver Honda Civic had come through at 5:28 a.m. One person in the driver's seat. The image quality was poor, but you could see it was a male, Asian, wearing dark clothing. I felt my heart start racing. I asked what time the car had exited. The attendant checked. It hadn't. The car was still in the park. I radioed all the rangers on duty, told them to look for David Chen's vehicle, gave them the plate number. We found it 40 minutes later in the parking lot at Yavapai Point. Empty, doors locked. I looked in the windows. There was nothing inside. No bags, no trash, no personal items. The car was completely clean. I ran the VIN number to be sure. It was definitely David's car, same vehicle that had been impounded after he disappeared, same vehicle that had been released to his family 3 weeks ago. I called his emergency contact number. His mother answered. I asked her if she knew where David's car was. She said yes, it was at her house in California. I asked if she was sure. She said she'd check and call me back. 5 minutes later, she called. The car was gone. She said it had been parked in her driveway and now it wasn't there. She asked if I'd found David. I told her I'd found his car. She asked where he was. I said I didn't know. Oh. We processed the vehicle for evidence. No fingerprints except ones that matched David's prints from his driver's license. No signs of forced entry. The odometer showed an additional 230 miles since it had been impounded. That's roughly the distance from David's mother's house to the Grand Canyon. Someone had driven the car from California back to the park. The question was who? I called Sarah, told her about the car. She went quiet for a long time. Then she asked me if I thought David had driven it. I said I didn't know how that would be possible. He'd been missing for 73 days. There was no evidence he was alive. She said maybe he was alive. Maybe he'd been somewhere else and now he'd come back. I asked where he would have been. She didn't answer. The Park Service put out a notice to all personnel. If anyone saw David Chen or anyone matching his description, report it immediately. We reviewed all the security camera footage from that morning. Found one clip, timestamped at 5:42 a.m. A figure walking on the rim trail toward Yavapai Point. Male, medium build, wearing dark clothing. The angle was wrong to see his face, but the height and body type matched David. The figure walked out of frame heading toward the overlook. We checked the other cameras. He never appeared on any of them. Just that one clip of him walking toward Yavapai Point and then nothing. I went to Yavapai Point that afternoon. Stood at the railing where David had been standing 73 days ago. Looked down. The perspective distortion was there like always. That convergence of walls that made the depth impossible to judge. I thought about what Sarah had said. About a person being in two places at once. About part of them being somewhere else. I thought about the voice I'd heard saying help. I thought about David's car driving itself 230 miles from California. I thought about the figure on the security camera walking toward this exact spot. I stayed there until dark. Watched the sunset and the canyon fill with shadows. Watched the geometry change as the light changed. At 8 p.m., the perspective distortion was at its worst. The walls converged so far out it looked like the canyon went down forever. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it over the edge. The beam disappeared into the darkness. I called out, said David's name. No response. I waited an hour. Called his name again. This time I heard something. Not a voice, a sound. Like wind moving through a narrow space. But there was no wind. I've been going to Yavapai Point every night since then. That was 3 weeks ago. I go at 8 p.m. when the perspective distortion is strongest. I stand at the railing and call David's name. Sometimes I hear the wind sound. Sometimes I hear what might be a voice but too faint to understand. Twice, I've seen a light moving deep in the canyon. Just a small point, far below, drifting back and forth. I've photographed it, but the images don't show anything useful. Just darkness. Last night, I brought climbing gear, set up a rope at the railing. I'm going to go down there. Not tonight, but soon. I need to see what's at the bottom of that sight line. I need to know if the canyon really is deeper than it looks, or if it's just distortion. I need to know if David Chen is down there. If that's him I've been hearing. If that's him driving his car back from California and walking toward this point on the security camera. I need to know what happens when you stand at one of these convergence points and look down at the exact wrong angle in the exact wrong light. I need to know if Sarah was right. If there are places where a person can slip through into somewhere else. The other rangers think I'm obsessing over a closed case. They're probably right. David Chen has been missing for 96 days. The search was called off after 2 weeks. His family held a memorial service last month. He's legally dead. The case file is in the archives. I should let it go, but I can't, because his car came back. Because I keep hearing sounds from below the rim. Because the perspective distortion at Yavapai Point makes the canyon look deeper at night, and something about that wrongness makes my brain scream that there's an explanation here I'm not seeing. I've requested the night shift permanently. My supervisor approved it without asking why. I think he's hoping I'll get bored and request a transfer. I won't. I'm going to keep going to Yavapai Point every night at 8 p.m. I'm going to keep calling David's name. And when I'm ready, when I've gathered enough nerve, I'm going to rappel down into that convergence and see what's there. Sarah called me yesterday. She asked if I'd been back to Yavapai Point. I said yes. She asked if I'd found anything. I said no. She didn't believe me. She said she could hear it in my voice. She asked me what I'd seen. I told her about the car, about the security camera footage, about the sounds I'd been hearing. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something that made my hands go cold. She said she'd been having the dream again, the one where she's watching David at the railing. But now, in the dream, when she looks away and looks back, he's not gone. He's turned around to face her. And she can see his face clearly, but it's not his face anymore. It's the same features, the same structure, but something about it is wrong. Like it's a photograph of him that's been distorted, stretched in some direction that doesn't exist. I asked her what she meant by that. She said she didn't know how to explain it. Just that in the dream, his face looked like it had depth in a way faces shouldn't have depth. Like, if you looked at it from a different angle, you'd see parts of it that were supposed to be hidden. She said she woke up from the dream feeling sick. Not scared, sick. Like her brain was rejecting what it had seen because it violated some fundamental rule about how things are supposed to look. I thought about the perspective distortion. About how the canyon walls converge at certain angles in certain light and create a sightline that the brain can't properly process. I thought about what my friend had said, that in certain geometric configurations, the depth cues contradict each other. I thought about what would happen if that distortion wasn't just visual, if it was something physical, something that changed the actual geometry of the space. I didn't say any of this to Sarah, I just told her to try to get some sleep. She said she hadn't been sleeping well. She said every time she closed her eyes, she saw David at the railing, and she kept waiting for him to turn around and look at her. I told her that was normal, trauma manifesting as recurring dreams. She said maybe. Then she asked me if I thought it was possible that David was still at Yavapai Point. Not his body, but some part of him. Some echo or impression. I said I didn't know what that would mean. She said neither did she, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd never left. That he was still standing there at the railing looking down into the canyon. Still seeing whatever he'd seen right before he disappeared. We talked for a few more minutes and then she said she was tired. Before she hung up, she asked me to promise I'd be careful. I asked what she meant. She said she'd been researching those other missing person cases I'd mentioned, the ones at the 17 locations. She said she'd found something in common. All of them had happened at specific times of day, times when the sun was at particular angles, times when the light would create the strongest perspective distortion. She said it was like the disappearances weren't random, like they happened when the conditions were exactly right. I asked her what conditions she meant. She said she didn't know, but she'd calculated the sun angles for each disappearance and they were all within a 5-degree range, always late afternoon or early evening, always when the sight lines were at their most distorted. She said David had disappeared at 2 p.m., which didn't fit the pattern. But then she'd checked the weather data for that day. There had been a storm system moving in. Heavy cloud cover. The light had been diffused and strange. She said maybe that created the same effect as late afternoon sun. Maybe that's why he'd been vulnerable. I didn't know what to say to that. The idea that people were disappearing because of sun angles and atmospheric conditions sounded absurd, but I couldn't explain David Chen any other way. I told Sarah I'd look into it. She thanked me and hung up. I haven't called her back. I pulled the weather data for all 17 disappearances. She was right. Every single one had happened during unusual atmospheric conditions, or at times when the sun angle would create maximum distortion. I cross-referenced this with the sightline geometry at each location. They all had the same thing in common: steep walls that converged at specific angles, sightlines that created depth perception problems, places where your brain couldn't accurately judge distance. I don't know what this means. I don't know if there's a scientific explanation or if I'm seeing patterns that aren't there. What I do know is that tomorrow night at 8 p.m. I'm going to Yavapai Point with climbing gear and I'm going to rappel down into that convergence. I'm going to see what's at the bottom of that impossible depth. I'm going to find out if David Chen is down there, and if he is, I'm going to find out what happened to him. I've written down everything I know in a file I'm leaving at the station. If I don't come back, someone will find it. They'll read about the 17 locations, and the perspective distortion, and the sun angles, and they'll probably think I lost my mind. Maybe I did. Maybe this whole thing is just me seeing connections that don't exist, because I can't accept that sometimes people disappear and there's no explanation. But I don't think so. I think there's something at Yavapai Point that shouldn't be there. Something in that convergence where the walls meet and the sightlines cross. Something that exists in the space between where your eyes think the bottom is and where it actually is. David Chen saw it. I think that's what he was photographing when he disappeared. I think he figured out what Sarah has been dreaming about, that the canyon is deeper than it looks. Not metaphorically, actually deeper. And that extra depth is filled with something. It's 7:45 p.m. now. I'm parked at Yavapai Point. The sun set 20 minutes ago and the canyon is filling with darkness. The perspective distortion is already starting. The walls look like they're converging further out than they should. I can see the railing where David was standing. I can see the slope below where I'll start my descent. My gear is ready. My rope is anchored. I've radioed my position to the station and told them I'm doing an equipment check and I'll be back in an hour. I'm not going to be back in an hour. I'm going down there and I'm going to find out what's at the bottom. I'm going to see what David saw, and if I'm right, if there really is something in that impossible depth, then maybe I'll find him too. Maybe he's been there the whole time, standing in a space that exists but shouldn't, looking up at the rim and wondering why no one can hear him calling for help. It's time. The distortion is at its peak. The canyon looks like it goes down forever. I can hear the wind sound starting, faint but distinct, coming from below. I'm clipping into the rope now, taking one last look at the rim, at the normal world where things make sense and people don't disappear into optical illusions. I'm going over the edge. If you find this, and I'm not back, check the 17 locations. Mark them on a map. Study the sightlines. Pay attention to the sun angles. Don't stand at the railings during periods of atmospheric distortion. Don't look down when the walls converge. Don't try to judge the depth when your brain is telling you something's wrong. And if you hear someone calling for help from below the rim, don't go looking for them. Because you'll find them, and they won't be what you expect. I transferred to the Grand Canyon from Yellowstone in February, 7 years ago. The first thing they tell you during orientation is that the canyon has its own rules, and you learn them by breaking them. The second thing they tell you is that approximately 12 people die here every year, and about 3 times that many go missing. They don't tell you that some of the people who go missing were rangers. They don't tell you that because they don't want you asking questions about why ranger disappearances are kept in separate files that only the superintendent has access to. I found out about those files by accident 4 months into my posting, and I've spent the last 7 years trying to forget what I read in them. It was June when I met Thomas Kerr. I wasn't supposed to be working that day, but we were short-staffed because of a training event in Flagstaff, and they'd called me in to cover the Hermit's Rest route. Hermit's Rest is at the western end of the Rim Road, about 7 miles from the village. It's less crowded than the main overlooks, but it gets its share of hikers, especially in summer. I was doing a routine patrol of the trailhead parking area when I saw a man sitting on the stone wall near the shuttle stop. He was maybe 60, gray hair, wearing clothes that looked expensive but well used. The kind of gear serious hikers wear after they've tested it for years. He was looking at a small notebook, writing something. I wouldn't have approached him except he was sitting on a section of wall that has a sign specifically telling people not to sit there. The stone is unstable in that spot. I walked over and politely asked him to move. He looked up at me and smiled like I'd said something funny. Then he asked me how long I'd been working at the canyon. I told him 4 months. He nodded and said that explained it. I asked what he meant. He closed his notebook and said, "When you work here long enough, you stop seeing the signs. You stop paying attention to the warnings because you realize they're not for the things that are actually dangerous." I thought he was making a philosophical point about risk management or something. I asked him to move anyway. He did, but as he stood up, he said something that stuck with me. He said the canyon doesn't kill people because they ignore signs. It kills them because they pay too much attention to what they can see and not enough to what they can't. Then he walked toward the trailhead and I went back to my patrol. I didn't think about that conversation again until 3 weeks later when Thomas Kerr was reported missing, and I realized he was the same man I'd talked to at Hermit's Rest. His wife filed the report. She said Thomas had gone out for a day hike 4 days earlier and never came back. She'd waited before calling it in because he'd told her he might camp overnight if he found a good spot, but he'd taken the car keys and his phone, and she couldn't reach him. When we asked where he'd been planning to hike, she showed us his notebook, the same one I'd seen him writing in. It was full of notes about the canyon. Geological observations, trail conditions, wildlife sightings. The entries went back 15 years. Apparently, Thomas had been coming to the Grand Canyon 3 or 4 times a year since he'd retired. He knew the park better than most of the rangers. The last entry in the notebook was dated the day I'd seen him at Hermit's Rest. It said, "Hermit Trail descent to Dripping Spring. Return via same route. Estimated 8 hours round trip." Below that, he'd written, "Check the spacing." That was it, no explanation of what spacing meant or what he was supposed to check. His wife said she didn't know what it referred to. She said Thomas had become increasingly interested in the geology of the canyon over the past few years, and sometimes he wrote things that only made sense to him. We started the search at the Hermit Trail. It's a steep trail that descends about 2,000 feet to a junction where you can continue to the Colorado River or branch off to Dripping Spring. The trail is well maintained, but it's strenuous, and it's easy to get in trouble if you're not prepared. Thomas had been prepared, though. According to his wife, he was an experienced hiker in excellent shape for his age. He'd done this exact hike a dozen times before. There was no reason to think he'd run into problems. We found his car in the Hermit's Rest parking lot. Locked, nothing inside except a light jacket. We hiked down the trail to Dripping Spring and back. Didn't find him. Didn't find any sign that he'd been there recently. We expanded the search to cover all the side trails and off-trail areas within a 2-mile radius. Brought in dogs. The dogs picked up a scent on the main trail but lost it at a switchback about a mile down. The handler said it was strange because the scent didn't fade gradually like it normally does. It just stopped, like the person had ceased to exist at that specific point. On the third day of searching, I went back to that switchback with another ranger named Davis. We wanted to examine the area more carefully. The switchback is a sharp turn in the trail, where the path doubles back on itself as it descends the canyon wall. On the outside of the turn, there's a sheer drop of about 400 feet. On the inside, there's the canyon wall. The trail itself is maybe 4 feet wide at that point. Not dangerous if you're paying attention, but easy to slip if you're not. We searched every inch of the trail and the area around it. Didn't find anything. No footprints leaving the trail. No signs of a fall. No disturbed rock or vegetation. Davis suggested we check below the switchback in case Thomas had somehow gone over the edge. We rappelled down and searched the slope for 3 hours. Nothing. It was like he'd walked to that switchback and evaporated. I kept thinking about what Thomas had written in his notebook. Check the spacing. I asked Davis what he thought it meant. He said maybe Thomas was measuring the distance between switchbacks or checking the spacing of rock layers. Both reasonable guesses, but neither explained why he'd disappeared. We climbed back up and I stood at the switchback looking at the trail, trying to see what Thomas might have seen. The spacing of what? That night, I went through the files on ranger disappearances. I'd read them before, when I first discovered they existed, but I hadn't paid close attention. Now, I read every word. There were 9 cases spanning 23 years. 9 rangers who'd gone missing in the canyon under circumstances that couldn't be explained. No bodies recovered. No evidence of what happened, just absence. What struck me was that 7 of the 9 had disappeared on or near switchbacks. Different trails, different parts of the canyon, but always at a point where the trail turned sharply back on itself. I made a list of the locations. Hermit Trail, switchback mile 1.2. Bright Angel Trail, switchback mile 3.7. South Kaibab Trail, switchback mile 2.1. Grandview Trail, switchback mile 1.8. The pattern was clear. I pulled topographic maps and marked each location. Then I measured the elevation drop at each switchback. They were all between 300 and 500 feet. I measured the trail width, all between 3 and 5 feet. I measured the angle of the turn, all between 130 and 150 degrees. The switchbacks were nearly identical in their geometry. Same drop, same width, same angle. I didn't know what that meant, but it felt significant. I thought about Thomas's note. Check the spacing. Maybe he'd noticed the same pattern. Maybe that's what he'd been investigating. But why would similar trail geometry cause people to disappear? I started hiking to each of the 7 switchbacks. Not during work hours. I did it on my own time because I didn't want to explain what I was looking for. At each location, I stood in the exact spot where the trail turned, and I looked around trying to see if there was something unusual. Some feature that all these places had in common besides the geometry. At the first 3 switchbacks, I didn't notice anything. They looked like normal trail turns. rock wall on one side, drop on the other, path curving sharply back. At the fourth switchback on the Grandview Trail, I saw it. It was late afternoon, and the sun was at a specific angle. When I stood at the turn and looked down the trail, both directions of the path were visible at the same time. The section I'd just climbed and the section I was about to descend. Because of the sharp angle and the way the trail doubled back, my eyes could see both paths simultaneously. And because the paths were at different elevations but similar distances from where I stood, they created a strange optical effect. My brain couldn't decide which path was closer. The depth perception kept shifting. 1 second the upper path looked nearer, the next second the lower path did. I stood there for 10 minutes experiencing this effect. It was disorienting, made me feel slightly nauseous. I stepped away from the turn and the feeling stopped. I stepped back and it started again. The effect only worked if you stood in a very specific spot at the exact point of the turn. A few feet in either direction, and the paths separated enough that your brain could process them normally. But right at the turn, in that narrow zone where both paths were visible at equal angles, something happened to your perception. I tested this at the other switchbacks. Same effect at all of them. That specific geometry, that angle of turn, the way the trail doubled back on itself, it created a perceptual blind spot. A place where your brain couldn't accurately judge spatial relationships. I thought about the ranger disappearances. They'd all happened at these spots, places where perception broke down. But that still didn't explain how people vanished. Perceptual confusion might cause someone to fall, but we'd searched below all these switchbacks. No bodies. I went back to Thomas Kerr's notebook, read through all his entries from the past year. Most of it was standard hiking journal stuff, but there were a few entries that stood out. 3 months ago, he'd written, "Switchbacks on Hermit Trail show consistent geometry. Measure angles tomorrow." 2 months ago, confirmed. All major trails have identical turn geometry at specific elevations. Research why. 1 month ago, possible perceptual effect at turns. Need to test at different times of day. Thomas had been investigating the same thing I'd discovered. He'd noticed the pattern in the switchback geometry and he'd been trying to understand what it meant. The last few entries in his notebook were more cryptic. 2 weeks before he disappeared, he'd written, "The spacing isn't spatial, it's temporal." 1 week before, effect strongest during transitions, dawn and dusk. 3 days before, "I think I know what's happening at the turns. Going to verify." I didn't understand what he meant by the spacing being temporal. Spacing implies physical distance between things. How could it be temporal? I looked up the word temporal in the context of physics. It means relating to time. The spacing between what and what in time. I read his entries again. Effect strongest during transitions. Dawn and dusk. Times when light is changing. Times when your perception of depth and distance is already compromised because the shadows are long and the contrast is high. I decided to test this. I went to the Hermit Trail switchback at dawn, arrived while it was still dark and waited for the sun to come up. As the light increased, I stood at the turn and watched the optical effect appear. At first, in the darkness, I couldn't see both paths clearly. As dawn broke and the light improved, both paths became visible, and that's when the perceptual confusion started. But it was stronger than it had been in the afternoon. Much stronger. The two paths seemed to merge and separate rhythmically, like they were oscillating between being the same path and being different paths. My brain kept trying to resolve which one was real and which was a reflection or an echo, and it couldn't. I felt dizzy. Had to sit down. The effect was so strong I thought I might actually fall. I closed my eyes and the feeling subsided. When I opened them again, the sun had fully risen and the effect had weakened. Still present, but not as overwhelming. I checked my watch. The intense phase had lasted about 4 minutes, the exact time when the light was transitioning from darkness to day. I thought about the ranger disappearances, 7 of them at switchbacks. I pulled the incident reports and checked the times they'd been reported missing. All of them had last been seen either early morning or late evening. Transition times. Times when the perceptual effect would be strongest. Thomas Kerr had last been seen at Hermit's Rest at 4 p.m. His planned hike would have taken 8 hours. He would have been at the mile 1.2 switchback right around dusk. I hiked down to that switchback late in the afternoon. Timed it so I'd arrive just before sunset. Got there at 7:45 p.m. The sun was low on the horizon. I stood at the turn and waited. As the light began to fade, the optical effect appeared. Both paths visible, depth perception failing. But as it got darker, the effect didn't weaken like I'd expected. It got stronger. The 2 paths started to look like they were in different places, not just different elevations. Different locations entirely. Like I was seeing 2 versions of the same trail that existed in separate spaces. The sun dropped below the rim. The canyon filled with shadow, and the effect peaked. For about 30 seconds, I couldn't tell which path was which. Couldn't tell if I was looking at one trail or 2 trails or the same trail in 2 different times. My brain was screaming that something was wrong with what I was seeing, but I couldn't look away. And then I heard something. It was a voice, faint, coming from the trail below me, the section I hadn't hiked yet. Someone said, "Hello?" I called back, asked if they needed help. No response. I waited. The voice came again. "Hello?" Same word, same tone, like a recording playing. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it down the trail. Nobody there. The voice came a 3rd time. "Hello?" And I realized it was coming from the same spot each time, not moving, not getting closer or further away, just repeating from a fixed point on the trail about 50 feet below the switchback. I hiked down to that spot, swept my light across the trail. Nothing, no one. The voice had stopped. I called out, asked if anyone was there. Silence. I stood there for 5 minutes listening. The canyon was completely quiet except for the wind. I hiked back up to the switchback. As soon as I stepped into the turn, the voice started again. "Hello?" Coming from below. Same spot, same tone. I left, hiked back up to the rim in the dark. When I got to my truck, I sat in the cab for a long time trying to process what had happened. A voice repeating from a fixed location. Only audible when I stood at the switchback. Only during that transition period between day and night. I thought about Thomas Kerr's note. The spacing isn't spatial, it's temporal. What if the switchbacks weren't just creating perceptual confusion? What if they were creating temporal confusion? What if that specific geometry at that specific time of day was somehow allowing me to hear something from a different time? Not a recording, not an echo, but an actual moment that was happening in a different when. I knew how insane that sounded. Time doesn't work that way. You can't hear the past or the future just by standing in a certain spot at a certain time. But I couldn't explain what I'd experienced any other way. The voice had been real, clear, distinct, and it had come from a specific location that had nothing at it when I'd checked. The next morning, I went to the superintendent's office. Asked to see the files on ranger disappearances. He asked why. I told him I'd noticed a pattern and wanted to investigate. He said those files were restricted. I asked why ranger disappearances were treated differently than tourist disappearances. He said they weren't. The files were just organized differently. I didn't believe him, but I couldn't push it without explaining what I'd found, and I wasn't ready to do that. I went back to the Hermit Trail switchback the next evening. Same time. Stood at the turn as the sun set. The optical effect appeared on schedule. The two paths merged and separated, and the voice started. Hello? I didn't go down to check this time. I just stood there and listened. The voice repeated every 30 seconds or so. Always the same word, always the same tone. I timed it. The voice continued for exactly 4 minutes. Then it stopped. The sun had fully set. The optical effect faded. The voice was gone. I recorded it the next night, brought my phone and started recording as the effect began. Got the whole 4 minutes. When I played it back later, the voice was there on the recording. Faint, but audible. Hello, repeated at regular intervals. I had proof now that I wasn't hallucinating. The voice was real. I sent the recording to a friend who did audio analysis. Asked him if he could tell me anything about it. He called me back 2 days later and said the voice was strange. It had acoustic properties that didn't match the environment. No reverb, no echo, no ambient noise. Like it was recorded in a completely dead space. He said the only way to get a recording like that was in a professional studio with full sound isolation. It shouldn't sound like that if it was recorded outside in a canyon. I asked him what he thought it meant. He said either the recording was fake or the voice originated from somewhere that had no ambient sound. I told him I'd recorded it myself. It wasn't fake. He said then he couldn't explain it. The voice existed, but it existed in a way that didn't make physical sense. I spent the next week visiting the other switchbacks at dusk. Same pattern at all of them. The optical effect would appear during the transition from day to night. And at each switchback, I heard voices. Different voices. Different words. But always the same pattern. Repeating from fixed locations. Only audible during those 4 minutes when the effect was strongest. At the Bright Angel switchback, I heard someone say, "Wait." At the South Kaibab switchback, I heard, "I don't understand." At the Grandview switchback, I heard, "It's not right." I started documenting everything. Made detailed notes of the times, the locations, the exact words I heard. Tried to find patterns in what the voices were saying. The words seemed random at first, but then I noticed something. They were all expressions of confusion or delay. Wait. Hello? I don't understand. It's not right, like the people saying them were experiencing something unexpected and were trying to process it. I thought about the rangers who disappeared. Experienced people who knew the trails and knew the canyon. What would make them confused? What would make them pause and try to understand what they were seeing? The perceptual effect at the switchbacks. If they were at the turn during the transition time and the effect hit them, they'd experience the same confusion I'd felt. The same disorientation. They might call out, might say hello or wait or I don't understand. And if the effect was strong enough, if the temporal confusion was real, they might not just be confused about space. They might be confused about when they were. I went back to Thomas Kerr's notebook. Read the last entry again. I think I know what's happening at the turns. Going to verify. He'd known about the perceptual effect. He'd been studying it for months. He'd figured out that it was strongest during transitions. He'd gone to verify his theory, and he'd disappeared. What had he been trying to verify? That the switchbacks created perceptual confusion. I'd already verified that. There had to be more. I read through all his entries again. Found one I'd missed. 6 weeks before he disappeared, he'd written, "If the geometry creates a perceptual loop, does the loop have a duration? Is it possible to be caught in it?" A perceptual loop, a situation where your brain can't resolve what it's seeing and gets stuck trying. That made sense. But caught in it. What did that mean? How do you get caught in perception? I tested this at the Hermit Trail switchback. Went there at dusk and deliberately stood at the turn during the entire transition period. Didn't move. Just stood there experiencing the optical effect for the full 4 minutes. The two paths merged and separated. My depth perception failed. And about 2 minutes in, something else happened. The trail started to look like it was moving. Not physically moving, but shifting in time. Like I was seeing it at multiple moments simultaneously. The path ahead looked like it was both in shadow and in light. The path behind looked like it had footprints in the dust and also looked pristine. Like I was seeing it before I'd walked on it and after I'd walked on it at the same time. I felt nauseous, dizzy. My sense of balance started to fail. I had to close my eyes. When I opened them, the effect had passed. The sun had set. The switchback looked normal, but I felt wrong, disoriented in a way that went beyond physical dizziness, like my sense of when I was had been disrupted. I checked my watch. It was 8:15 p.m., but I'd arrived at 7:45, and the transition period should have only lasted 4 minutes. That meant it should be 7:49. I'd lost 26 minutes. I hiked back up to my truck, checked the clock on my phone, 8:15, the same as my watch. I'd definitely lost time. Not lost as in couldn't remember. Lost as in it had passed without me experiencing it. I'd stood at the switchback, closed my eyes for what felt like a second, and 26 minutes had gone by. Where had I been during those minutes? What had I been doing? I had no memory of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about those missing minutes. Tried to remember what had happened after I closed my eyes. The last thing I remembered was feeling dizzy. Then nothing. Then opening my eyes and the transition was over. 26 minutes of nothing. I checked my phone for clues. No calls made, no texts sent, no photos taken. I checked my body for injuries. Nothing. No scrapes, no bruises. I checked my clothes. No dirt, no damage. It was like those minutes simply hadn't existed for me. I went back the next night. Same switchback, same time. This time I kept my eyes open the whole time. Forced myself to watch the optical effect even though it made me feel sick. The paths merged and separated. The temporal shifting started. The trail looked like it existed in multiple moments. And then I saw someone. They were standing on the lower path, about 50 feet past the switchback, just standing there facing away from me. I couldn't see details because the light was fading, but it was definitely a person. I called out. They didn't respond, didn't turn around, just stood there. I started walking toward them. As I moved down the trail, they stayed the same distance ahead. Like they were walking too, but I couldn't see them moving. I called out again, no response. I kept walking. They kept staying the same distance away. I realized I'd walked past the switchback. The transition period should have ended, but the effect was still happening. The trail still looked temporally unstable, and the person was still ahead of me. I stopped walking. They stopped too. Still the same distance away. I took a step back. They moved back, maintaining the exact same spacing. I understood then. It wasn't a person. It was me. I was seeing myself walking down the trail. But not now. Some other time. Past or future, I couldn't tell. I turned and ran back up to the switchback. As soon as I crossed the turn, the effect stopped. The trail looked normal. I checked my watch. 8:17 p.m. I'd lost 2 minutes this time. I looked back down the trail. Nobody there. Nothing but empty path disappearing into shadow. I drove back to the station and pulled every file I could find on the ranger disappearances. Read them all again, looking for details I'd missed. Found something in the report on a ranger named Mitchell who'd disappeared 11 years ago on the Bright Angel Trail. A hiker had reported seeing Mitchell at a switchback around dusk. Said Mitchell had been standing at the turn looking confused. The hiker had asked if he was okay. Mitchell had said something about seeing himself on the trail. The hiker thought he was joking and moved on. 2 hours later, Mitchell was reported missing. Never found, seeing himself on the trail, the same thing I'd seen. I wasn't the first person to experience this. Mitchell had seen it too, and he'd disappeared. I thought about what Thomas Kerr had written. Is it possible to be caught in it? Caught in a perceptual loop, a situation where you see yourself in a different time and can't tell which version is real, which version is now. I made a decision I wasn't going back to the switchbacks at transition times. Whatever was happening there, it was dangerous. People were getting caught in it, getting lost in their own perception of time. I filed a report recommending that the trails be closed during dawn and dusk hours. My supervisor read it and asked if I was feeling okay. I said I was fine. I just noticed that most of the disappearances happened during low light conditions and thought it would be safer to restrict access during those times. He said that wasn't practical. Too many hikers use the trails in early morning and evening. He suggested I take some time off. I took a week off, spent it researching temporal perception and optical illusions. Tried to find any scientific literature that explained what I'd experienced. Found nothing that matched. Plenty of information about how the brain processes time and space, but nothing about locations where time perception could be disrupted to the point of causing missing time or seeing yourself in different moments. I started to think maybe I was losing it. Maybe the stress of the job and the missing person cases had pushed me into some kind of break from reality. Then I got a call from Thomas Kerr's wife. She said she'd been going through his belongings and found a second notebook. This one had been hidden in his camping gear. She'd only discovered it because she was donating the gear and had checked all the pockets. The notebook was full of entries he hadn't wanted anyone to see. She said she'd read it, and she thought I should read it too. She said it was about the switchbacks. I drove to her house that afternoon. She gave me the notebook. It was smaller than the first one, pocket-sized. The entries were dated over the past year. The first few pages were similar to his other notebook. Observations about trail geometry and perceptual effects. But about halfway through, the tone changed. He'd started experiencing the same things I'd experienced. Missing time, seeing himself on the trail, voices repeating from fixed locations. He documented it all in detail. One entry from 3 months ago said, "The spacing is the interval between moments. At the switchbacks during transitions, multiple moments exist simultaneously. The geometry creates a fold in temporal perception. You can see and hear things from different whens." 2 months ago, I saw myself today, walked past myself on the trail. We didn't interact. I think each version exists in a separate moment and we're isolated from each other even though we're in the same space. 1 month ago, the loop is a trap. If you stay in it too long, you lose track of which moment is yours. You become unstuck. I think that's what happened to the missing rangers. They got caught in the loop and couldn't find their way back to now. 2 weeks ago. I've been experiencing time skips, minutes I can't account for. I think I'm slipping into the loop even when I'm not at the switchbacks. The effect is spreading. Or I'm becoming more sensitive to it. The final entry was dated the day he disappeared. I'm going to the Hermit Trail switchback one more time. I need to test something. If the loop is a trap, there must be a way to escape it. I think the key is knowing which moment is real. Which version of yourself is the one that exists in actual time. I think I figured it out. The real you is the one who's confused, the one who's trying to understand. The copies, the versions in other moments, they're just repeating actions. They're stuck in their moment. If you can maintain awareness of your confusion, awareness that something is wrong, you can orient yourself to now. That was the last thing Thomas Kerr wrote. The next day he went to the switchback, and he never came back. I thought about what he'd written. The real you is the one who's confused. It made sense in a way. If you're seeing yourself repeating the same action, that version is caught in a loop. But if you're aware that you're seeing something wrong, that you're confused, that means you're still present, still in the now, still capable of change. I sat with that notebook for 3 days, tried to decide what to do with it. I could give it to the superintendent, explain what Thomas had discovered, recommend that we close the trails or at least put up warnings about the switchbacks, but I knew what would happen. They'd read the notebook, and they'd think Thomas had been mentally ill. They'd dismiss it as the delusions of someone who'd gotten disoriented and fallen. They wouldn't take it seriously. Or I could go to the switchback myself, test Thomas's theory, see if it was possible to escape the loop, see if that's where he was, caught in some moment that he couldn't get out of. Maybe I could find him, bring him back. At the very least, I could verify what he'd discovered, prove that the temporal effect was real. I chose the second option. I know that was stupid. I know all the warning signs were there telling me not to, but I couldn't let it go. I needed to know if Thomas was right, if the rangers who'd disappeared were stuck in loops at those switchbacks, if there was a way to get them back. I went to the Hermit Trail switchback at dusk 3 days ago, brought climbing rope and emergency supplies in case I needed them. Arrived at 7:45 p.m. just as the sun was starting to set. Stood at the turn and waited for the effect to begin. It appeared on schedule. The two paths merged. My depth perception failed. The temporal shifting started, and I saw myself on the lower path, standing about 50 feet away, facing away from me. I remembered what Thomas had written. The real you is the one who's confused. I was confused, very confused, which meant I was real. I was in the now. The version of me on the lower path was a copy. A moment caught in a loop, I started walking toward it. It moved away, maintaining the same distance. I kept walking, kept my awareness focused on my confusion, on the wrongness of what I was seeing. The version stayed ahead of me. I walked for what felt like a long time. The trail should have ended or branched or changed elevation, but it didn't. Just kept going. Same slope, same angle, same switchback ahead that I never reached. I realized I was in the loop, walking the same section over and over. The geometry was repeating, or time was repeating, or both. I stopped walking. The version ahead stopped too. I turned around. There was another version of me behind me, also 50 feet away, also facing away. I was caught between two moments, one ahead and one behind, both of them me, both of them in different whens. I stood there trying to figure out which direction was now, which path led back to real time. Thomas's voice came from somewhere, not ahead or behind, somewhere else. He said, "You need to choose." I spun around looking for him, couldn't see him, just the two versions of myself at equal distances in both directions. His voice came again. One path leads forward, one leads back. But forward and back don't mean the same thing here. You need to choose which moment you want to exist in. I called out to him, asked where he was. He said, "I'm in between, same as you, same as all of them. We're all in the spacing, the temporal interval. We got caught and we couldn't find our way out because we didn't understand that you have to choose. You have to commit to a moment." I asked how to choose. He said, "The version of you that's most confused. That's the one that's still changing, still experiencing time. Go toward your confusion." I looked at the two versions of myself, one ahead, one behind. They were both facing away, so I couldn't see their expressions. Couldn't tell which one was more confused. Then I realized that was the point. I was the confused one. I was standing in the middle, trying to figure out what to do. The versions weren't trying to figure anything out. They were just existing in their loops. I was the one still in motion. still in time. I picked a direction. Didn't matter which one. Just picked one and started walking. The version ahead moved away. I kept walking. Maintained my awareness of confusion, of uncertainty, of being present in a moment that was still unfolding. The trail started to change. The slope increased. The switchback got closer. I was leaving the loop, finding my way out. I reached the switchback, stepped through the turn. The effect collapsed. The trail looked normal. I checked my watch. It was midnight. I'd been in the loop for over 4 hours. I looked back down the trail. Empty. No versions of myself. No Thomas. Just normal trail disappearing into darkness. I hiked back up to the rim. When I got to my truck, I sat there for a long time trying to process what had happened. I'd been in the loop. I'd heard Thomas. He was still there, caught in the spacing between moments. And he wasn't alone. He'd said all of them. The other rangers, they were all there. All stuck in temporal intervals at the switchbacks where they'd disappeared. I drove back to the station, filed a report saying I'd searched the Hermit Trail and found no sign of Thomas Kerr. Didn't mention the loop or the temporal effect or the conversation I'd had with Thomas's voice. Just said the search had been unsuccessful. My supervisor read the report and closed the case. Thomas Kerr was officially listed as missing, presumed dead. I haven't been back to any of the switchbacks since then. It's been 3 days. I've been trying to figure out what to do with what I know. If I tell people, they won't believe me. If I don't tell people, more rangers might disappear. More hikers might get caught in the loops. But I don't have proof. Just my experience and Thomas's notebook. That's not enough to convince anyone. Last night I had a dream. I was standing at the Hermit Trail switchback. Thomas was there, so were the other missing rangers. All 9 of them. Standing at equal intervals on the trail, all facing away from me, all caught in their moments. Thomas turned around, looked at me, said, "We can't get out. We chose wrong. We went toward certainty instead of confusion. We tried to find the moment that made sense, and we got stuck in it. You have to warn them. Tell them not to look for sense at the switchbacks. Tell them to embrace the confusion. That's the only way through." I woke up at 3 a.m. Couldn't go back to sleep. Sat at my desk and wrote everything down, this whole account of what happened, what I've discovered, what I've experienced. I'm leaving it here at the station. If something happens to me, someone will find it. Maybe they'll believe it. Maybe they won't. But at least it will be documented. I'm going back to the switchbacks, not tonight, but soon, because Thomas is still there, the other rangers are still there, and I think I can get them out. I think if I go into the loop again and find them and show them how to choose confusion over certainty, they can follow me back to now. It's probably a stupid idea. It's probably going to get me caught in there with them. But I can't leave them there. I can't know that they're stuck in those moments and not try to help. The thing about the Grand Canyon is that it's deeper than people think. Not just physically deep. Deep in ways that don't show up on maps. There are layers of time folded into the rock just like there are layers of rock folded into the canyon. And at certain places, in certain geometries, those temporal layers become accessible. The switchbacks are entrances, doorways into the spacing between moments. Most people walk right through them and never notice. But some people who are paying attention, people who are looking for patterns, they see the doors. And sometimes they go through, and sometimes they don't come back. I've been a ranger at the Grand Canyon for 7 years. I've learned the rules by breaking them. And the most important rule, the one they don't tell you, is that some doors shouldn't be opened. But I'm going to open them anyway. Because 9 people are on the other side and they're waiting for someone to show them the way home. If you're reading this, I either made it back or I didn't. If I didn't make it back, Don't come looking for me. Don't go to the switchbacks during transitions. Don't stand at the turns. Don't try to make sense of what you see there. Just close the trails. Put up barriers. Keep people away from those specific geometries at those specific times. Because once you see the spacing, once you understand that time isn't as linear as you thought, it's very hard to stay in now. And the loop is patient. It will wait for you to choose wrong. And then you'll be there too, in between, in the spacing, waiting for someone who understands confusion to come and lead you home. I'm leaving this notebook at the station. Tomorrow at dusk, I'm hiking to the Hermit Trail switchback. I'm going into the loop. I'm finding Thomas and the others, and I'm bringing them back. Or I'm staying there with them. Either way, the spacing won't be empty anymore. Either way, someone will know they're not forgotten. The canyon is deeper than it looks. Remember that. The worst part about finding someone's belongings at the canyon isn't what's there. It's what's missing. I've been a ranger here for 6 years, and I can tell you exactly what a day hiker carries. Water bottle, phone, wallet, keys, maybe a camera. When you find all of that sitting neatly on a bench and the person is gone, your brain starts asking questions it doesn't want answered. September 14th. I was closing the North Rim Visitor Center when I found the backpack. Black Osprey day pack sitting on the bench outside the main entrance. Nobody around. I checked inside for ID, found everything. Amanda Voss, 32, from Seattle. Her phone was at 60% battery. Last call made 3 hours ago to someone named Eric. I tried calling back. No answer. Her car keys were attached to the pack. I walked the parking lot until I found her car. White Subaru, Washington plates, locked. Standard protocol. I radioed it in and started searching the immediate area. The North Rim is quieter than the South Rim. Fewer tourists, easier to search. I covered every viewpoint within half a mile. Nothing. Brought in another ranger named Cole. We split up and searched until dark. No sign of her. The next morning, we found her jacket. Quarter mile from the visitor center, draped over a fence post on the transept trail. Not dropped, not blown there by wind. Draped, folded neatly, and placed on the post like she'd meant to come back for it. The trail continues another 2 miles along the rim. We searched every inch. Nothing else. Day 3, we brought dogs. They picked up her scent at the visitor center, followed it to where we'd found the jacket, then lost it. Handler said the scent just stopped at the fence post. We searched below the rim thinking maybe she'd gone over. Found nothing. No disturbance in the vegetation. No signs of a fall. What bothered me was the pattern. Backpack at the visitor center. Jacket quarter mile away. Both placed deliberately. Not lost. Not discarded. Placed. Like she was leaving markers. Like she was trying to tell us something about the direction she'd gone. I hiked the transept trail alone that night. Stood where we'd found the jacket. Looked ahead down the trail into darkness. Tried to think like Amanda Voss. What would make someone leave their belongings behind? What would make them walk into the canyon at night without their phone or water or any way to call for help? That's when I saw the lights. 3 of them. Small points of white light hovering about 50 feet out from the rim. Just hanging there in empty space. I watched them for 5 minutes. They didn't move, didn't flicker, just existed where nothing should exist. I radioed Cole. He came out with binoculars. Couldn't see any source for the lights. No aircraft, no reflection, no logical explanation. We watched them for an hour. Then they went out. All 3 at once. Like someone had flipped a switch. We found Amanda Voss's shoes the next morning. 1.5 miles down the trail. both of them placed side by side on a flat rock. Laces still tied, socks tucked inside. I picked one up, still warm. Cole looked at me, I looked at him. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. The shoes had been there less than an hour. We'd just searched this section at dawn. They hadn't been there then. We ran down the trail, calling her name. Got to the end where the trail terminates at a viewpoint. Nothing. Just the canyon spreading out in all directions. Cole wanted to call it in, get more people. I told him to wait. I needed to think. The pattern was clear now. Backpack, jacket, shoes, a trail of belongings leading away from the visitor center. Each item placed deliberately. Each item getting more personal, more essential. She was leaving pieces of herself behind as she walked. But walking where? The trail ended. There was nowhere else to go unless you went over the rim. I looked down. The canyon wall dropped vertical for 300 feet. I got my binoculars and scanned the rocks below. Saw something. A flash of color, red fabric. I focused. It was a shirt, caught on a ledge about 100 feet down. I could see the fabric moving slightly in the wind. Cole set up climbing gear. I rappelled down. The ledge was narrow, barely 3 feet wide. The shirt was there. I picked it up. It was still buttoned, still held the shape of a body, like someone had taken it off carefully and laid it down. I looked over the edge of the ledge. Below was another drop. And on a rock outcropping 200 feet further down, I saw something else. Pants, folded neatly. I climbed back up, told Cole what I'd seen. He asked if I'd seen her. I said no, just her clothes, placed at intervals going down. He asked what we should do. I said I didn't know. That night the lights came back. 7 of them this time. Same location, same height. Hovering in space where the north rim drops into darkness. I counted them, watched them. Thought about Amanda Voss walking the trail, leaving her belongings behind. Thought about her climbing down into the canyon in the dark. Removing her clothes piece by piece, going deeper. We suspended the search after 2 weeks. Amanda Voss was listed as missing. Her family came. I had to tell them we'd found her belongings but not her. Her mother asked me where I thought she'd gone. I didn't answer. I still patrol the transept trail. Every night at the same time. The lights are always there now. I've counted as many as 12. They never move, never change position, just exist in that space between the rim and the canyon floor, existing where nothing should exist. Last week, I found something new. At the viewpoint where the trail ends. Fresh footprints in the dust. Bare feet, leading to the edge. Then nothing. I looked down with my binoculars. Thought I saw movement on one of the lower ledges. Something white. Could have been rock. Could have been skin. I haven't told anyone about the footprints. Haven't told anyone the lights are increasing. Haven't told anyone that sometimes late at night I hear singing coming from the canyon. A woman's voice. Wordless. Just a melody that rises and falls with the wind. Amanda Voss has been missing for 4 months. The case is cold, but the trail of her belongings continues. Every few weeks I find something new. A watch, a ring, a hair tie, always further down. Always placed deliberately. She's still leaving markers, still telling us where she's going. I know where the trail ends. I've known since the beginning. It ends where the lights are. In that space that shouldn't exist. That's where she went. That's where they all go. The ones who see the lights and understand what they mean. The ones who start removing what connects them to here. Piece by piece. Until there's nothing left but themselves. And then they step off the rim into that impossible space, and they become light too. The lights are calling, I hear them now, even during the day, even when they're not visible. They hum at a frequency just below hearing. My backpack feels heavy lately. I've been thinking about leaving it somewhere. Maybe on a bench. Maybe someone will find it. The canyon is patient. It doesn't need to rush. It knows I'm already walking the trail, already leaving pieces behind, already moving toward the edge where the lights wait, where Amanda waits, where all of them wait in that space between falling and flying. I've been a ranger here for 6 years. Soon, I'll have been here forever.